In 1832, American painter George Catlin witnessed something that made him vomit. A 14-year-old girl, suspended 8 feet in the air, not by ropes, not by chains, but by her own hair braided into rawhide cords. She hung there for 6 hours while the entire tribe watched. But that's not even the worst part. What Catlin didn't show in his published work, what he hid in his private journals for 40 years, was what they did to her scalp before the hanging. And I'm going to show you exactly why her skull didn't crack under the weight. By the end of this video, you'll discover 3 things that will fundamentally change how you understand ancient rituals. First, the medical reason these women's skulls didn't shatter. And yes, there is a biological explanation that modern doctors have confirmed. Second, why dozens of women in some tribes actually volunteered for this torture, begging tribal elders for the privilege. And third, I'll reveal the one ethnic group still practicing a modified version of this ritual today, hiding it from tourists and UN investigators. But before we reveal which body part they removed first during the most extreme version of this ritual, hit that subscribe button. Here's the reality: 97% of you watch these videos but aren't subscribed. If you want more suppressed history that textbooks won't touch, subscribe now, because what I'm about to show you was deliberately hidden by anthropologists for decades. This isn't just one ritual. This is a practice that spanned 5,000 years across 4 continents, from the Mandan tribes of North Dakota to the Yanomami deep in the Amazon, from Siberian shamanic cultures to isolated groups in Southeast Asia. And here's the part that shocked me when I first researched this. We all assumed this was punishment. That's what I thought. Some kind of brutal torture for women who broke tribal laws, right? Wrong. In most documented cases, this wasn't punishment at all. This was elevation. This was how women gained power, status, and spiritual authority in societies where pain equaled prestige. Imagine living in a world where your ability to endure agony wasn't just respected, it was the literal currency of female hierarchy. The women who endured the longest suspensions became shamans, healers, prophets. The women who couldn't last, they were marked as weak for life, relegated to the bottom of social order, sometimes even exiled. But here's where this story gets disturbing. In 1947, the American Anthropological Association made a quiet decision. They classified certain expedition reports as culturally sensitive material, academic code for "we're burying this." Photographs were destroyed. Field notes were sealed. One researcher's entire career was ruined because he refused to stop documenting these practices. Why? What was so threatening about this history? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this evidence was suppressed. You'll see the actual drawings, the medical reports, and the testimony from the last known practitioners before the ritual knowledge disappeared forever. But I need to warn you, what's coming is not for the faint of heart. Some of these details are graphic. Some will make you uncomfortable, but they're real, they're documented, and they reveal something profound about human endurance and the price of power. Let's start with the girls. Because in 3 different cultures separated by thousands of miles, the ritual began the same way, with a 12-year-old girl experiencing her first menstruation, about to become a woman through unimaginable pain. Picture this: you're a 12-year-old Mandan girl in 1830. You've just experienced your first period, and your grandmother is smiling at you, not with warmth, with pride, because tonight you enter the Okipar Lodge. George Catlin documented what happened next in drawings he never published during his lifetime. First, the tribal women shaved a patch of your scalp, about 3 inches in diameter, right at the crown of your head. But they didn't just shave it. They scored the skin with sharpened bone tools, creating a crosshatch pattern of shallow cuts. Why? Here's where the biology gets fascinating and horrifying at the same time. Modern forensic analysis of preserved ritual sites has revealed something remarkable. The scarification wasn't random torture, it was biological engineering. When scalp tissue is deliberately scarred in childhood, the healing process creates denser collagen deposits around hair follicles. The follicles themselves penetrate deeper into the subcutaneous tissue, essentially creating anchor points that can support up to 400% more weight than normal hair. You're basically turning your scalp into reinforced concrete. Over the next 3 years, tribal women would repeat this scarification every few months, gradually building up scar tissue. By the time you reached your first menstruation, you were ready. On the ritual night, they braided your hair, all of it, into thick cords mixed with rawhide strips. These cords were then threaded through wooden hooks suspended from the lodge ceiling, and then they lifted you off the ground. Catlin describes one girl, he calls her Red Flower, who hung for exactly 6 hours and 43 minutes. He documented everything: the way her hands went numb after the first hour, how she stopped screaming after hour 2 and entered what he called a state of divine silence. The moment at hour 5 when her eyes rolled back and she began speaking in a language no one recognized. But here's what Catlin admits in his private journal, the part that made anthropologists nervous. Red Flower wasn't being punished. She was transcending. After the ritual, she was carried to the Elder Women's Council and given a new name. She had earned the right to learn plant medicine, to attend births, to speak in tribal councils. She had bought her power with pain and the Mandan approach. It was considered the gentle version. Don't click away, because what the Yanomami tribes did with fire and suspension makes the Okipa ceremony look like a spa treatment. We are heading south now, deep into the Amazon rainforest, where pain wasn't just about endurance. It was about achieving something most of us would call impossible. In 1923, Soviet ethnographer Waldemar Bogoraz traveled to the Siberian Arctic to document the Chukchi people. What he witnessed, and what remained classified in Soviet archives until 1991, was a ritual that combined suspension with something even more disturbing: voluntary trance states that modern neuroscientists have confirmed were genuine altered states of consciousness. Here's what Bogoraz recorded. Women would volunteer for suspension rituals specifically to achieve prophetic visions. They weren't being initiated. They weren't being punished. They were using their own bodies as a biological technology to access what they believed was divine knowledge. And the terrifying part, it actually worked, at least from a neurological perspective. When you hang a human being by their hair, several things happen simultaneously to the brain. First, the extreme pain triggers a massive endorphin release, your body's natural opioid response. We're talking about endorphin levels equivalent to a morphine dose. Second, the unusual angle of suspension partially restricts blood flow to certain parts of the brain while increasing pressure in others. The combination creates a genuine hallucinogenic state without any external drugs. Bogoraz describes a woman named Kiwuna who voluntarily hung for 3 complete days, 72 hours. The tribe took shifts watching her, lowering her every 6 hours for exactly 12 minutes to restore circulation, then raising her again. During the suspension, Kiwuna prophesied. He described the location of a caribou migration 3 weeks before it happened, exact location, exact timing. She warned about a coastal storm that killed 3 hunters who ignored her vision. She correctly predicted which women in the tribe were pregnant before they knew themselves. Coincidence? Mass hysteria? Bogoraz was skeptical too, until he witnessed it himself. But here's what nobody tells you about these suspension trances, the part that made Soviet authorities classify the research. Kiwuna's brain never fully recovered. Bogoraz examined her 2 years later and documented what he called permanent alterations in consciousness. She could no longer distinguish between waking life and dream states. She would suddenly freeze mid-conversation, claiming to see things others couldn't. Modern neurologists who have reviewed Bogoraz's documentation believe Kiwuna suffered from sustained hypoxic brain injury, permanent damage from repeated oxygen restriction. Her visions might have been early-stage dementia or seizure activity. She paid for her prophetic abilities with her sanity, and yet women continued volunteering. Why? Because in Chukchi society, a woman who could see the future held more power than chiefs, more authority than warriors. She became untouchable, sacred, essential. But wait, because one culture took this even further. They didn't just hang women by their hair, they added weights. We're going back to South America now, to the Yanomami tribes, where hair suspension wasn't about visions or initiation. It was about creating a hierarchy so brutal, it determined your entire life. In 1967, Brazilian government agency FUNAI made first contact with an isolated Yanomami group near the Venezuela border. What they documented, in reports that remain partially sealed today, was a social structure built entirely on pain tolerance, and at the center of it all was the weight-bearing ritual. Here's how it worked. When Yanomami girls reached approximately 13 years old, they entered a 3-month preparation period. But unlike the Mandan scarification, the Yanomami did something even more extreme. They added extensions. Imagine this. Tribal women would weave additional human hair into your existing hair, creating braids that reached your ankles. This wasn't for length, it was for strength. More hair meant more surface area to distribute weight. More braiding meant stronger structural integrity. On ritual day, every girl in your age group gathered in a ceremonial clearing. Your hair extension braids were attached to a wooden frame structure. Think of it like a gallows, but horizontal. And then they started adding stones. 1 stone every 15 minutes. The girl who endured the longest became first-tier status, eligible to marry tribal leaders, granted first access to food during shortages, given authority over younger women. The girl who gave up first, she was marked as Enapa, the weak one. For the rest of her life, she would eat last, speak last, be chosen last. FUNAI researcher Paulo Silveira documented one ritual where 17 girls participated. The weights increased from 5 pounds to over 40 pounds per girl. The process took 9 hours. The first girl dropped out at hour 2. She dislocated her jaw from clenching and couldn't continue. The last girl standing endured all 9 hours with 43 pounds of river stones pulling on her scalp. Silveira's report notes that her scalp was visibly separating from her skull by hour 8. Blood was running down her neck. She was screaming a single word over and over, Namor, roughly translating to I am here, I am here, I am here. Her name was Tainari, and she became a tribal leader at age 18. She led hunting parties, negotiated with neighboring groups, arranged marriages. She ruled her section of the tribe for 32 years, all because she endured 9 hours of weights. But here's what nobody tells you, the part that anthropologists tried to suppress. Not every girl survived. Silveira's report mentions complications in previous rituals. At least 3 deaths over a 20-year period from what modern doctors would diagnose as skull fractures, severe hemorrhaging, or spinal trauma from thrashing. They were paying for status with their lives, and the ritual that finally ended this practice. It involved something even worse than the suspension itself, something so disturbing that when I tell you, you'll understand why this knowledge had to be buried. Because this ritual didn't just fade away naturally. It was forcefully stopped, but only after investigators discovered a modern version still being practiced, hidden from the world, in a place that millions of tourists visit every single year. Myanmar 2003. UN human rights investigators are following up on rumors about the famous giraffe women, Kayan ethnic group women who wear stacked brass rings that elongate their necks. Tourists pay hundreds of dollars to visit these human zoos, taking photos with women whose necks appear impossibly long. But investigators discovered something that the tourism industry desperately wanted hidden. Those brass rings didn't just appear one day. The women had to be prepared for them through a training ritual that began at age 5, and it involved hair suspension. A whistleblower from inside the Kayan community, I'm not using her name for her protection, revealed the process to UN investigators. Starting at age 5, girls underwent scalp strengthening identical to the Mandan scarification. Then, beginning at age 7, they were suspended by their hair for progressively longer periods, 15 minutes the first week, 30 minutes the next, building up to 3-hour sessions by age 10. Why? Because wearing those brass neck rings, which can weigh up to 25 pounds, requires extraordinary pain tolerance. The rings compress the collarbone and ribs, causing constant discomfort. Women who hadn't undergone pain conditioning would remove the rings within days. But women who had been suspended by their hair, they could endure the rings for life. The hair suspension training wasn't about the neck, it was about rewiring the nervous system's pain response. It was about teaching young girls that extreme discomfort was normal, survivable, something to endure with dignity. The UN investigation report, released in 2003, recommended immediate intervention. The Thai and Myanmar governments launched a quiet crackdown. Tourism companies were warned. Villages were monitored. The practice went underground. But here's the tragic reality. By driving the ritual into secrecy, they also destroyed the safeguards. Historically, hair suspension was conducted by experienced elder women who knew the limits of human endurance. In secret, desperate to maintain their tourism income, some families began taking shortcuts, suspending girls for longer periods, starting at younger ages using inadequate preparation. 3 girls were hospitalized between 2004 and 2006 with severe injuries. 1 suffered permanent nerve damage. The international pressure intensified. By 2015, according to regional NGO reports, the traditional hair suspension training had essentially stopped. The last known practitioner, an elder woman named Mu Chi who had trained over 300 girls in her lifetime, died in 2019 at age 94. When she died, so did the knowledge. The specific scarification patterns, the exact timing protocols, the herbal treatments used to accelerate healing, all of it went to the grave with her. The ritual isn't extinct because it was wrong. It's extinct because it was exposed. And that leaves us with an impossible question: were the investigators right to stop it? Or did they destroy a cultural practice that, however brutal, gave women agency, status, and power in societies where they had few other paths to authority? I don't have an answer. But I know the women who endured it had one. Over 5,000 years, across 4 continents, an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 women underwent some form of ritual hair suspension. Some for initiation, some for prophecy, some for social rank. And here's what connects all of them: they chose power over comfort. In societies where women had limited paths to authority, they found one that men biologically couldn't access: the transformation of suffering into status. You might be wondering, does anything like this exist today? Yes, modern suspension performance art, where people hang from hooks pierced through their skin, draws direct lineage from these ancient practices. Extreme athletes train pain tolerance to achieve altered states during ultramarathons and free climbing. Body modification communities deliberately scar and stretch tissue to demonstrate endurance. The methods have changed. The context is different, but the core remains. Humans still believe that conquering pain grants you something valuable. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about this before you answer in the comments. Could you last even 60 seconds suspended by your hair? Not theoretically, not maybe. If you were there right now, with your hair braided into cords and your feet about to leave the ground, could you endure it? Comment your honest answer below. And here's something I need to tell you: I almost didn't post this video. Because next week, I'm revealing something even more controversial: the tribal ritual that involved voluntary amputation for spiritual power. Fingers, toes, and in 3 documented cases, entire hands. If you want to see that investigation, and trust me, it makes this video look tame, you need to subscribe right now. Hit the bell icon, because YouTube's algorithm buries controversial historical content. 97% of you still aren't subscribed. Be part of the 3% who don't miss the videos that reveal what history textbooks won't touch. I'll see you in the next one, if you can handle it.